In the Unresolved Problems segment tonight, we continue our coverage of the president's renewed push for immigration reform. In his speech on the subject today, he also took a shot at Arizona's new immigration law.
Laws like Arizona's put huge pressures on local law enforcement to enforce rules that ultimately are unenforceable. These laws also have the potential of violating the rights of innocent American citizens and legal residents, making them subject to possible stops or questioning because of what they look like or how they sound.
The president also addressed the problem of our porous borders.
Government has a threshold responsibility to secure our borders. That's why I directed my Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, a former border governor, to improve our enforcement policy without having to wait for a new law.
Wait a second, that's the same Janet Napolitano who said this last week.
The notion that you're going to seal that border somehow is something that anybody who's been involved in the actual doing of law enforcement, the front office work of the front line work of the law enforcement would say. You're never going to totally seal that border.
With us now, Noorani, who's the executive director of the National Immigration Forum. Ali, it's good to see you. The president comes out, he says we're going to do this push and a pathway to legalization for the millions of people who are here illegally. At the same time, you see the results of most recent polls is that Americans really want this border enforced. They are in support of Arizona's law. And when you see those poll results, do you think, well, God, Americans just don't get it? Americans are they're inherently discriminatory, or they believe in racial profiling?
Actually, what I see is that Americans want Congress to act, and Americans are tired of Washington, D.C. and just the politics as usual. So over 70% of Americans want this Arizona law. They like it. But you ask that same 70% if they want the federal government to pass comprehensive immigration reform, 84% say they want Congress to act. So there's no difference here. People just want action.
You honestly think when we have unemployment at about 10%, in some parts of the country where the president traveled yesterday, 14.2%, that Americans now are saying, if you could only legalize the millions of people here illegally, do you really think that is the goal of the American people right now, or the desire?
Americans there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety.
They want it all fixed. That's what they want.
People there are a lot of problems we have to fix as a country. But when you ask people, do we want to fix our immigration system, they say yes.
They want the borders enforced, 83%.
They want the borders enforced, they want people legalized, they want to make sure that everybody becomes a taxpayer. They want to make sure that no crooked employer is exploiting an American worker and an immigrant worker. People realize that to fix the immigration system is in the interest of their community and our nation.
Why don't we just enforce the border?
Enforcing the border is part of that. But
why is it part of it?
Because if you just enforce the border but you don't actually equal the playing field in the labor force, you're only solving...
What do you mean equal the playing field? I don't understand what that means.
What that means is that as long as you have an undocumented worker, you have a worker that's being exploited by a crooked employer. So that means that that American board worker working next to him or her is also being exploited.
Well, we have wages that are being undercut by an influx of illegal workers in this country.
We have wages that are being undercut by crooked employers who are able to exploit
Are the illegals crooked?
No, the crooked employers are crooked.
Do the illegals have any blame here?
They have to be held accountable and held responsible, just like the president said.
Taking an English test? Is that how you hold them accountable?
Taking the English test, being required to register for legal status. Those are the kinds of steps.
How does the kid in Ghana feel about that? I mean, his mother has been trying to apply for a visa to come work here. How do they feel about this treatment that people who violated our laws continue to demand? They don't ask for it. They demand. We want voting rights. We want health care. We want public schools. We want all these things because we're already here.
The president actually brought that up today. He said, fix the border, force people to register for legal status, and fix the legal immigration system.
Why don't they go home and reapply like everybody else?
It's totally unpractical.
Why?
11 million people just getting up and leaving. Get 11 million people.
You think the country won't survive that?
I don't think people think that's a practical solution. People want practical
People are already leaving Arizona. They're self-deporting. That's very practical.
They're self-deporting to Texas, to Pennsylvania. They're going back.
Right, because until those states actually have laws like Arizona's, and 20 states are already considering those laws.
And those states are going down a bad path because they're going to be sued.
Aha! Bad path. Why is it a bad path? They're enforcing the laws that you say Americans want enforced. You said that earlier.
But they are going down a path that is going to lead to lawsuits that will cost those states a lot of money.
Because we have activists who don't believe in enforcing the laws.
And also, just cuts across our Constitution. Our Constitution says that the immigration laws should be enforced by the federal government. And that's what 84% of Americans want.
You actually think the Supreme Court would rule that the Constitution does not allow for immigration laws to be enforced and carried out?
According to the Constitution, it says immigration, the treatment of aliens is a federal responsibility.
You got to read George Will's column on this. He did a fantastic column looking at actually what was considered as an illegal immigrant or not at the time.
The majority of Americans want comprehensive immigration reform, in Washington D.C.
Will, if you say it enough, it might be true. Hey, we appreciate it. It's always great to see you. Thanks for coming on.